pandemic. With all the avenues for communication today, there's more opportunities and there's more examples of bullying. And so we just thought it was prudent that we tackle this subject. And bullying's not new. It's been around forever. As long as there's been people, there's been bullying. What may surprise you is the number of instances in Scripture where we come across bullying. So we're going to do a 3-part series, and here's how we're going to do it. My job today is to kind of roll it all out, get all of us on the same page, look at some Scripture, look at an individual, a group of individuals in Scripture, actually a group and an individual, see what we can learn from those Scriptures, and then Scott Pierce is going to, next week, he's going to talk to us, and each week we're going to have a look at one individual or one group, and Scott's going to talk to us next week about why people bully. And then the following week, Tyler has the very easy task of explaining how do we handle bullying? What do we do? So really interesting series, tough series. And so I'm going to look for some response from you guys today for some things. So need you to be really honest now. How many of you at some point in your life have been bullied? Wow. How many of you have watched someone else being bullied? How many of you watched the U.S. elections this year? I don't need to really say much more, okay? So just so we're on the same page, what I want to do is to go through some information and just hang with me for a while, just so that we're all on the same page and we understand what we're talking about. So here's the RCMP definition of bullying. It says bullying happens when there's an imbalance of power. When someone purposely and repeatedly says or does harmful things to someone else, and bullying can occur one-on-one or it can occur in a group of people. Okay, so we need to look at this. So the whole idea of an imbalance of power, okay? So someone has power over someone else. And when you think about that, the implications of that could apply to parents. Because we have power over our kids and the responsibility. It could be a work situation. Your mind could be a group of people. It could be someone who's physically stronger than someone else. It could be an extrovert who can exert power just by the sense of their being over a person who's an introvert. Okay, there's all sorts of scenarios. So it's someone who has an imbalance of power, and they purposely or repeatedly do things to hurt someone else, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, but they're purposely doing something to hurt someone else. And there's 3 different types. Could be physical, where physical harm is caused. Could be anything from hitting, kicking. And I was surprised to see this next definition, spitting. And spitting, do you know that you can be charged with assault if you spit on someone? Or another physical thing is if you break something that belongs to someone else, so you're purposely hurting them in some way by destroying something that they have. Interesting, at the former church that I was at, we had a huge benevolent fund. It was a big church, huge benevolent fund, and part of my responsibilities was to administer that benevolent fund. And in doing so, you kind of had to be a bit of a detective, because certainly there were people who needed help, but there were also some other people out there who understood that they could get some money from churches, and if they were really good at it, they could get a lot of money. So some of the pastors from bigger churches, we had a little network. We developed some ties with the social workers, and we had some things to do, or ways to ascertain if we were being scammed or not, because the last thing we wanted to have someone take advantage of the church. And I discovered that one individual that came was scamming us. He was going to different churches. He had a job. That was just how he got extra money. So anyway, when he came one time, I had mentioned to the gals in the office, this guy we don't help anymore. And so I was out of the office one day, and he came and talked to my secretary. And when she said, I don't think, and I wish she hadn't done it, but she decided she'd help out. She said, I don't think we're going to be able to help you any longer. And he took off on her and said really rude things, threatened her, and tore around the office, frightened all the rest of the secretaries, and stomped out. So she told me about it when she came back. Everybody was really, really upset. So I said to him, if he ever shows up again, even if I'm here, you don't let him in the office. You tell him to wait on the bench outside the office, and then you don't have to deal with him. So anyway, he came again. And so I went out to talk to him on the bench, and as polite as I could, explained that, no, we won't be able to help you any longer. And he immediately destroyed a brochure cabinet we had there, tipped it over, there was papers flying everywhere else, and spit on me, probably about 4 or 5 times. It was just a bullying tactic. And it's interesting, in the paper recently, I've seen people charged with assault because they spit on someone else. Anyway, that's part of physical abuse. Verbal abuse is when we use words to hurt someone else. Name calling, putting people down, threats, teasing that we think may be funny but really, really hurt someone else. Social bullying, really interesting because they captured it well in the clip that we saw, because social bullying is more common among girls and females than it is among males. It involves using friends and relationships to hurt someone, spreading rumors, gossiping. And that's something that sometimes we don't really equate with bullying. But when we spread gossip, oftentimes we don't know what we're spreading is true or not. And even if it is true, it may well be hurtful, and the person we're spreading gossip about may not want other people to know that information. And once you pass on gossip, you can't get it back. And that's a form of bullying, whether we want to believe that or not. And Scripture has a lot to say about that. We have really, really great neighbors where we are. I have one neighbor that I'm very careful about passing information on, because she's a gossip. And she's gossiped lots to me, and I just try to ignore it and change the subject. But it's a form of bullying when it hurts someone else, whether she's doing it, anybody does it intentionally or otherwise. Social bullying is when we exclude others from a group. Probably some of us have experienced that. Or making other people look foolish or unintelligent. One of the things I learned about being a leader a long time ago is if you're gonna congratulate or encourage someone, it's always wise to do that in public. You know, if you're going to give someone some attaboys, do it in public, and that helps encourage people. But if you're going to criticize someone, wrong place to do it. If you're going to criticize someone, you take them into an area where they're private, where the conversation is between the two of you. Otherwise, what we wind up doing, if we criticize someone openly in public, we're bullying. Okay, so just good common sense to congratulate in public and to criticize in private. Cyberbullying is just pandemic now. When I was growing up, there obviously wasn't the opportunities to do what people can do today. And it's just crazy, the opportunities and how it's used today to repeatedly use those technologies to intimidate or to harass others. Things like threatening emails or mean emails, text or instant messaging. Anybody, have you been aware of the President of the United States, his latest tweet? Like, unbelievable. Like, it is just flat out bullying. He tweeted about 2 hosts on NBC. Unbelievable that someone do it. Straight out bullying. When we post embarrassing photos of someone online, and again, this is something that has changed over time. Like, I don't understand why anybody would take or allow to be taken any embarrassing pictures or intimate pictures of themselves anyway, particularly in this day and age because it is so easy to have those passed on. And if you've been reading the Peterborough newspaper in the last month, there's been 2 individuals that have been charged with passing on or posting intimate pictures of a former boyfriend or a former girlfriend. And it's simply a form of bullying and a form of harassment and trying to embarrass that person. Creating a website to make fun of others, pretending to be someone else by using their name, or tricking someone into revealing personal or embarrassing information and then passing it on to others. They're all forms of cyberbullying. And the big difference with cyberbullying from other types of bullying is it follows you around. If you're a student and you're at school and you're bullied at school, then maybe you get a break when you come home. But if it's cyberbullying and you're online or you have a smartphone, it follows you everywhere you go. You can't get away from it. And it's just insidious. So now, some questions for you guys. And Scott's got the mic, or you can, we're a small group, if you holler loud, we can hear you, and I'll repeat just if someone's watching this online. What do you think are the effects or the results of someone being bullied? Jeremy.
I think it's mostly because of pride, and I was one of those culprits myself. Not culprits, but I mean...
It affects their pride, you mean?
Yeah, because the people, they'll say things in a way that just kind of makes it kind of like they'll shrug off and joke about something, and they're not being serious about it because they just want to...
Okay, so you're saying it's prideful for the person who's doing it. Okay, what I'm looking for is, and that's good, we understand it. What about the victim? What about the person that's being bullied? What are the effects or the results on a person that's being bullied? Caitlin.
Maybe they might feel a little bit upset or mad.
Sure, they would feel upset. Yeah. How about some others?
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem, okay. Absolutely, yeah. Depression.
You build a thick skin.
Pardon me?
You build a thick skin.
Okay, hopefully.
Don't be the victim.
Hopefully you build up thick skin. That's a hard thing to do. When I was going into first heading towards ministry, I had a pastor I really, really respected, and he said, I want to give you 2 pieces of advice that'll serve you well on the ministry. And I said, okay, glad to hear them. What are they? He said, one is develop a really good prayer life. And I thought, I can do that. And the second one was develop thick skin. And I'm thinking, so how do you do that? Because words hurt. And it's just not something you can turn a switch and all of a sudden your skin gets thicker. It's hard to do sometimes, yeah. Yes, Grace.
I was thinking about King David and how he was persecuted and virtually bullied all around the territory of Israel by his opponents.
Okay, how do you think he felt?
And how he felt was, well, like when you read the Psalms, he always begins lamenting and
Sure.
pouring out his heart to God. And that's how it starts. But when you get to the end, he's turning it over to the Lord and asking him to carry the pain of being so
Okay. But
persecuted
at the
and
start,
rejected.
he's experiencing pain, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the effect for sure. Yeah, he feels it.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. So, other comments? Jeremy?
I was gonna say maybe you can feel shame as well.
Ashamed? Absolutely, sure.
I
Okay,
think they start to believe.
pardon me?
I think people start to believe the things that they're being said about them.
Sure.
Like if you hear something over and over again, even though it's not true.
That's why the gossip and the rumors are so insidious, yeah. And yeah. And then how do you face that? Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, way up the back.
Suicidal ideation.
Suicidal, absolutely, yeah. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, you've nailed most of the ones that I had: depression, social anxiety, loneliness, isolation, stress-related problems. Sometimes people develop physical symptoms, headaches or upset stomach, low self-esteem, absenteeism. When people are dealing with the effects of someone bullying them, often they don't want to go to school. Often they don't want to be at work and be around the people that bully them. So there's a higher degree of absenteeism. Sometimes they develop aggressive behavior, okay? Somehow rationalizing that aggressive behavior will somehow help them out of this situation. And finally, as Nancy mentioned, contemplating self-harm. That's fairly common. According to an outfit called Digital Parenting, they did a study 3 years ago, and here's what their study showed: that nearly 43% of all young people have been bullied online. 43%. And they said because 80% of the kids today use phones to communicate, that's the most common medium for bullying to occur. Question for you: what percentage of kids that are bullied are willing to share the fact that they're being bullied with their parent or a trusted adult? What do you think? Just holler it out.
15?
What, 15%? 0, 5%? Yeah, it's 10%. 1 out of 10 kids, only 1 out of 10 would share that information with a trusted adult or a parent. Girls are twice as likely to be abused or to abuse than boys are, okay? Bullied victims are 9 to 10 times more likely to consider committing suicide. 2 to 9 times. Like, that's just astounding. And it's not just a problem for young people, it can affect all of us. We see scriptures in the Bible, and we're going to have a look at that. I grew up in Smiths Falls, went to Elgin Public School, was close, right across the street from where we lived. When I was in grade 6, there was a young lad who was 1 year ahead of me. He was in grade 7, and Detlef was his name. Detlef came from Germany with his family. They'd come here to Canada to start a new life. And he had a pretty thick German accent. And we had another chap who was also in grade 7, and his last name was Pepper, and we just called him Pepper. But I think his first name might have been Billy. And Billy was a bully. And if you were short or tall or heavy or skinny, or you wore glasses, or you had an accent, or he didn't like the color of your hair, or if he didn't like the way you walked, he would tag a nickname on you. And he had a nickname for everyone. He never called them by their first name. If he was with a group of people and you walked by, he would take a swing at you because he thought that was funny. And other people at school were afraid to, on the way home, to go anywhere near Billy Pepper because they were afraid of getting beat up. And it was just unbelievable, all the things that he did. Anyway, part of our routine was, after recess, we had to line up every class, boys at one entrance, girls at the other entrance. You lined up according to class. So I'm lined up with the grade 6 classes. There's a couple rows for the grade 7 classes. And I noticed Detlef was holding his arm and crying. And he seemed to be, so I said to him, like, is something wrong? And he said, my arm hurts really, really bad. And he said, I don't want to move it. So anyway, I stepped out of line, went over, and he had a jacket on, and I unbuttoned the top 2 jackets and got his arm in there, and I said, that'll help hold your arm up. And I went and I told the teacher. And so she came over and talked to Detlef. And we didn't see Detlef for about 3 or 4 days. And when he came back, he had a cast on his arm. And the story finally came out that Billy Pepper had got a hold of Detlef, and he used to call him the Kraut all the time. That was his nickname. And he thought it would be funny to hear Detlef cry. So he got a hold of his arm, and he started twisting his arm. And he actually broke Detlef's arm in 3 different places. And all the rest of the students, the one who saw it, were afraid to tell the teacher because maybe Billy Pepper would find out and they would be next. I don't know what happened over the summer, but Billy wasn't back that fall. But what I do know happened is about a week later, the boys in grade 8 decided that Billy Pepper needed to be stopped. So the word went around at a recess, and from grade 6 up, all the boys gathered around Billy, and we had a huge, huge playground. We had 2 soccer fields, 2 baseball diamonds, and lots of room in between. And we all backed Billy Pepper into a corner, and the grade 8 lad said to him, "You understand from this point on that if you bully anyone else, you're dealing with all of us." And it stopped. It stopped. But unbelievable that he would go to that point of breaking someone's arm. So now I want you to fast forward 40 years, okay? I'm associate pastor of a large church in Thornhill. Our lead pastor had been with us probably about 10 years at that point. And in the bylaws of the church, there was a provision there that after you had been on staff as a pastor for 7 years, you had an opportunity to go on a sabbatical. And it was simply because we worked crazy, crazy hours, and the opportunity for burnout was really, really high. So our senior pastor had applied to go on a 6-month sabbatical. He was a superb preacher, and so they decided what they would do is to bring in an author who was a good speaker, and he would cover the preaching on Sundays. At the same time, they were considering doing something that had been done in other large churches, and the whole idea was to bring in what they called an executive pastor. The executive pastor's job would be to take all the responsibilities, the day-to-day running of the church, away from the senior pastor. Senior pastor could concentrate on vision casting for the church, setting the direction for the church, preparing his sermons, that type of thing, dealing with the board and some of the other people in the church. And the executive pastor, he would, all the other pastors would report to him. And that was what they were toying with, and it had been done in a few places. So the chap they chose to be an executive pastor wasn't a pastor, which absolutely astounded me. He was a businessman. He owned 1 business in Canada and 2 in the States, and he had just sold his 2 businesses in the States, and he was on a board of another church. And so the reasoning was that this guy had lots of extra time now on his hands. And so what they were going to do is to apply, in my thinking, a business model to a church, which is not very good thinking, and from my point of view anyway. So Roly joined us. And he joined us a month before our lead pastor went on vacation. And so we were all introduced, and he said, what I'm going to try to do is to meet with you one-on-one this week, and we'll get to know each other. So I was next in seniority to the lead pastor, so I was first on his list. So I walked into Roly's office, which he had just redone. In 1 week, he got rid of all the furniture, and he had the biggest desk I've ever seen. Like, it could have been used for an auxiliary landing strip for Buttonville. It was that big. And that was his power desk. And he stayed behind it. Anyway, I went in, and the first words that he said to me were, "How do you feel about working for someone who has a reputation as a hatchet man?" First words. And if you don't know what a hatchet man is, he's a guy you bring in to get rid of people, to clean house, and to reduce expenses. I was shocked. And so I said, well, have I any reason to be worried? He said, no. I said, I just wanted to see your reaction, whatever. So after our meeting, I left and went down the hall to the senior pastor and said, who is this guy? And so I told him what had happened, and he was absolutely shocked, just shocked. Anyway, as the next week and a week and a half went by, he had a nickname for every person on staff. There were 16 of us, and that's how we were all called, by our nickname. And some of them were really rude and ignorant. And so I went into his office one day and shut the door, and I said, Roly, I haven't heard nicknames like that since I was in public school. And I said, we really value each other here, and we respect each other. And I said, it's not very respectful when nicknames like you're using are used even in front of people in the congregation. And he said, so you think I should stop? Yeah. So anyway, to his credit, he did. In our meetings previously, probably 2 or 3 years previous to that, we had developed a set of meeting guidelines just to make meetings more efficient and to operate well. And so we had things in there. We all developed it. We all had input. And we had things like you turn your cell phone off when we come to a meeting, so no cell phones go off. Everybody has a right to speak, and we will value everybody else's opinion. And so we had a number of those things that we'd laid down. We agreed that we'll all be there on time to start a meeting so we don't waste anybody's time. And every new employee that we had on staff, we gave them a copy of that. And so we did that with Roly as well. We had never used, we had one thing in there. If the emotional level got too high in a meeting, we agreed that anyone could call a timeout. And if someone called a timeout, we would all go and grab a coffee or a cup of tea, head for the washroom or whatever, take a 5-minute break or 10-minute break till the emotional level come back down, and then we'd all get back together. We had never, ever used that. In the first year and a half that Roly was with us, that was used 4 times, and twice the meeting never reconvened. And I remember one of the times I knew that our worship leader was visibly upset, and I went into his office and he was crying. And over the course of that year and a half, I saw 4 or 5 pastors brought to tears because the man was a bully. Finally, the board realized what was going on. And everybody, like the kids in school, everybody was afraid to go and talk to the board members for fear it got back to Roly, because maybe Roly would get rid of you. And during the course he was there, two pastors left that quit. Couldn't handle it anymore. So we don't, all that to say, bullying can occur at any level. They terminated Roly. The chairman of the board came in and spent probably an hour with the pastoral staff and the support staff and apologized for what had happened and said, we have made a huge, huge mistake in hiring this guy. So bullying can happen at any level. So want to have a look at what Scripture says about bullying or not bullying. Here's from Mike. It says, people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, I'd like us to say that. We leave the people out, just start at the, but I'd like us to personalize that. So where it says you, why don't we insert me? And where it says your God, why don't we say my God? So let's personalize that and read that together. Will you do that with me? The Lord has told me what is good, and this is what he requires of me, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with my God. Let's try it again. The Lord has told me what is good, and this is what he requires of me, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with my God. If we look at Proverbs says there's 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that he detests. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that kill the innocent, a heart that plots evil, feet that race to do wrong, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who sows discord in a family. All smacks of a bully. All smacks of a bully. So I want to give you a bit of a backstory on where we're going today and the people we're going to look at in Scripture. Jesus was about 30 years old, maybe a little older. He'd started his ministry, and people flocked to hear him. They were intrigued by what he had to say. They were impressed that he was not socially selective. Jesus was as comfortable as sitting around with a smelly fisherman or a tax collector or one of the religious leaders. It didn't matter. He was not socially selective. He was quite comfortable with everybody and with all types. And he really, really cared about people. We often see where he's healed people physically, where he's done things to help them emotionally or spiritually. And Jesus, one of the big things is Jesus never seemed to be cowed by the powerful. He never seemed to knuckle under to those that might be intimidating to someone else. And all through his ministry, Jesus taught about love and he taught about caring, often in contrast to the religious leaders of the day. And because of that, because of the people were interested in him and flocked to him, the religious leaders of the day started to get a bit worried. They were worried that they were going to lose power and they were going to lose control. And maybe sometimes you and I think some of the thoughts that they had. Sometimes when our children are growing up and starting to experience and some of the independence and try to express their own independence, we worry that maybe we don't have the same control over them that we used to do, and we try sometimes to save them from hard lessons, but we're losing control sometimes, and that can be bothersome. It can be in a marriage where two individuals absolutely refuse to compromise. That can be an issue. It can be an issue at work where there's someone who's a foreman or a supervisor, and someone who's under their control starts to buck the system. That can cause tension with individuals. So we don't like to lose control sometimes either. The religious leaders and the Pharisees absolutely did not. So we come to the Jewish festival. It's the festival of shelters or tabernacles, and it's a 7-day long festival, and that's where they celebrated the tent that God, the tabernacle that God was. They saw that was a home for God. They also had. They lived in tents when God gave them the 10 Commandments, so that was a celebration, 7 days. And Jesus had been teaching throughout that 7 days. And the crowds have been getting bigger. And on the 7th day, Jesus is teaching, this large crowd had gathered around, and all of a sudden things got really, really ugly. And here's what it says in John records. He said, as he was speaking, Jesus, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd, and teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? And they were trying to trap him into saying something that they could use against him, and they kept demanding an answer. So I wonder how this woman felt. Certainly she'd been caught doing something that was wrong, but she'd been dragged out in front of this large crowd, probably thrown on the ground. And here's these men trying to trap Jesus, and they're using her. It's not really a case of about whether to stone her or not. They could have made that decision themselves. Interestingly enough, the man that she committed adultery with is not there. So it's not really an issue about punishing people who are caught in adultery. The whole thing is she is being used and abused and bullied to try to somehow trap Jesus Christ. The Pharisees are ethicists. They are not theologians. So let me explain. They're ethicists. They're not theologians. Ethicists are those people who know all the rules and the regulations, and that's how they live their lives. You could ask a Pharisee or you could ask one of the religious leaders about any law, and they had them memorized. And they knew exactly what it said. But ask one of them how well they understood God and how well they understood God's love, and they probably would stumble. That would be a difficult thing for them to do. Okay, but they knew all the laws, they knew all the regulations, and all they were interested in was trapping Jesus at this point. And it wasn't just this one time. They questioned Jesus' authority when he did miracles. They tried to trap Jesus a number of times. They asked him about, well, who do you pay taxes to, and what amount of money goes to God? All about the rules and the regulations, never about God's love or never about how God wanted to treat us. They challenged him time and time again when Jesus healed someone and it happened to be the Sabbath. Never once in Scripture that I can remember do you ever hear one of the Pharisees or one of the religious leaders saying, good for you. Like, what a fantastic thing for you to do that person. He can walk again. His leprosy is gone. He can see again. But what the constant challenge was, you didn't follow the rules and the regulations. You healed on the Sabbath. Why would you do something like that? They use gossip and rumors and false witnesses to undermine and to defame Jesus. And the story continues. So they were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him, but Jesus stooped down and he wrote in the dust with his finger. And they kept demanding an answer, so he stood up and said, all right, but let the one who's never sinned throw the first stone. And then he stooped down again and he wrote some more in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. And then Jesus stood up again and he said to the woman, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you? No, Lord, she said. And Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more. What an amazing response to that situation. He took the time, he knelt down and he wrote something in the sand, and the experts have all sorts of ideas. I think he might have been writing the name of the accusers there. They think maybe Jesus might have been so shocked by what was going on that he just needed the time, or maybe he didn't know what to say and he needed time to think about it. Who knows? Here's what I think. I think he did a very, very wise thing, because sometimes when we're in difficult situations, we just need to pause and take time. I think he needed to pause to decide exactly how I'm going to handle this situation. How am I going to treat this woman that's being bullied so badly? And maybe I'll just take enough time here to let it sink into the crowd what's really going on here. Maybe. That's my theory of what might have been going on. He absolutely respected the woman that was there, even though she was caught in adultery. He respected her. He didn't bully her. He treated her with kindness. He didn't condemn her. He gave her another chance. He didn't overlook her sin either. I suspect that the last few words he had to say to her, go and sin no more, weren't hollered so everybody in the crowd could hear. I can envision Jesus taking her by her hand and lifting her up and saying, look, go. Just don't sin anymore. What a wonderful contrast between Jesus and the Pharisees. See, Jesus had brought a brand new perspective on God's love, and he called it the New Covenant. Basically, the New Covenant is summed up in two things, and Scott's been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first, he said, the first and the greatest commandment. And the second one is equally important, to love your neighbor as yourself. So he said the entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. And then Luke says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I sometimes like to take scripture and I put it into my own words. So my own words for this would be just treat other people the way that you would like to be treated. All the laws, all the rules and all the regulations, Jesus says, can be broken down into these two things. Love God with everything that's in you, and treat other people the way that you would like to be treated. Let me suggest to you that there's a little Billy Pepper, and there's a little Roly, and there's a little Pharisee in each one of us. And there may be times when we